Again, with the use of GPS, this can help aid strength conditioning coaches to use GPS to try to capture those moments in game to make sure that you are training for what you think the game of football is. You know, in today's day and age, if you guys do go down this field of strength conditioning or sports science, you'll hear a lot of people talk about player load. Player load is a very popular metric. It's a metric that's specific to whatever GPS you use. Everyone has a variation of this, and basically what this is just a one-sum number for load. It's just like you calculating tonnage in the weight room. The only problem I had with player load is I could get a player load of 200 in 10 minutes by sprinting back and forth. You could get a player load of 200 by doing a 30-minute run. So there's really no context. It's just a number at the end of the day. It has been shown to be reliable, but not valid. Meaning, I can't go out in the field and measure what player load is. They do give you the formula on how to calculate it, but you don't know the sensitivities of kind of how those acceleration data and GPS data get filtered into that equation, which led me into using total distance as a marker of load and intensity. This is a little screenshot of kind of how the data comes in on our end. This is actually a screenshot of our alignment algorithm. So what you'll see here at point 1, this is when the lineman gets into his stance. And then you'll notice this little brief period where there's nothing going on. That's because he's in his 3-point stance waiting for the snap of the ball. So what it's going to do next is it's going to record the next 6 seconds. And again, this is coming from your gyroscope, so that you're getting accelerations, decelerations, by knowing the position of the body. Down here, this is another trace of another form. This is what they have labeled here, player load. But your velocities will look very similar to that. So when it snips out this little piece, it will just overlay the acceleration, the distances, everything that you would need for that little 6-second period. This is really useful when it comes for our alignment because it does it for us, so we can look at average load per contact per play, and we don't have to do anything on the back end. But when you're looking at some of these other positions like wide receivers, defensive backs, quarterbacks, you manually have to go in and overlay this with video and look at when a play happened to create that little 6-second period. So that's kind of where that very detail-oriented task comes through, where you have to create all these periods that analyze the data this way. Going into some periodization strategies, so using this GPS technology to kind of aid in your plan. You know, there are some sort of, I guess, conflicting ideas about if periodization works in team sports. And yeah, there's probably some truth to that, but I do believe that, you know, you still need a plan. You need something in place, just a global plan, to make sure things don't go haywire, that you have conflicting sort of training modalities going on. Again, using GPS and the information you get back, like total distance, high speed distance, change of direction, things like that, you can use it to model your periodization strategy there. And so when I got here, this plan was already in place. I just wanted to monitor the process of it to see if it even was what we were doing in game. And like any good periodization strategy, it's the trade-off between training, recovery, and recovery. And the program that we used incorporated these 3 principles: general adaptation syndrome, stimulus fatigue recovery adaptation theory, and fitness fatigue paradigm. Kramer and colleagues explain the importance of having a plan in place for in-season. This study looked at soccer players, and basically they looked at starters and non-starters. And the starters played, you know, every game, racked up a significant amount of distance, whatever you want to call it. But their practices were tailored to the starters' recovery, not to the lack of stimulus from the non-starters. So you actually saw a maintenance of fitness in the starters, and you saw some detraining going on in your non-starters. So that becomes a big issue if a starter did get hurt, and then a reserve had to go in and play. Well, that's a huge load to them, and now they're at risk for injury. So it's just really important that you have a place that takes care of both parties, and that's hopefully what this model, or these 3 models, do for us. The first one, just going over these real quickly, general adaptation syndrome. This is something we should all be familiar with if we're, you know, physiology majors. This was used for the oscillation of practice loads and intensities to combat the stresses of competitive gameplay. You know, your games are probably going to be your highest load and intensity, so you need to delegate enough time in between your game and your next high intensity practice to make sure that you got some recovery going on so you can get after it again the next day. The second one is the stimulus fatigue recovery adaptation theory, and really what we're hounding in here is just this area of fatigue and recovery. Basically, this is, if you were to have a really, really high stimulus, you got to devote enough time in between that next stimulus, enough recovery. That's like me going out right now and running a marathon. I'm probably going to need quite a few time to recover before I start training again. Now the problem with that is if you don't manage your training and you do have to devote that much time to recovery, you start to lose out on some of those training adaptations that you have. So for us, it was max speed. Our coaches love max speed, they love reporting it, they love seeing guys run fast. They think it's a huge component of our game and how we win games. Problem with max speed is when you start talking about residual training effects, meaning if you don't use it, you lose it sort of deal. It's got a window of 3 to 5 days. So if you don't stimulate that again within 3 to 5 days, you could see some involution occurring. So that's kind of where this theory came in. So basically, when are we going to have the next high stimulus day after a game day? And then the last one was the fit fat theory. This one kind of goes hand in hand with your stimulus fatigue theory. As fatigue accumulates, your fitness goes down. And so this was really used in terms of quantifying when are we going to rest and how are we going to rest. We implemented what was called a two-phase taper. Now this is largely anecdotal. There's really no hard evidence that says this works. Most of the evidence comes from track athletes. We had a situation in 2014 where we saw a better CNS response by implementing this two-phase taper, meaning we did what we call a fast Friday. So in traditional football, a lot of times you'll have your 2 high days of the week, and then you will just slowly taper into the game. Meaning you'll have you'll subtract your load, 75% on Thursday. The day before a game on Saturday is probably going to be like a walkthrough day, 50%, getting your mind right. And then you have your game on Saturday. Well, we decided to flip those 2 days, meaning Friday was our more high intense day in comparison to our walkthrough day on Thursday. And that was really to help kind of prime the CNS. So the purpose of this paper was to characterize the typical volume and intensities for weekday practice and competitive games. Then I wanted to compare those days to games to see if we were even hitting our training intensities. Running through these methods, we had a convenience sample of guys that were on GPS that the coaches wanted. We had 30 guys on GPS, so we had 15 starters, 15 non-starters. It actually worked out pretty good. Players completed 5 practice sessions in 1 game per week. This was over the course of a 13-week season, so from late August to late November. For inclusion, players must have obtained at least 75% of data for each practice and game days. 2 GPS variables were measured: total distance and high speed distance, greater than 75%. I've already talked about the GPS.
What's the greater than 75%?
Yeah, I've got it coming up. I've kind of had these misordered. So the GPS that we used was an S5 GPS unit. It's kind of the higher end one on the market. It's the GPS samples at a rate of 10 hertz a second, and the accelerometer sample at a rate of 100 hertz a second. So we're getting some pretty good data coming in. The validity and reliability for these specific monitors has been shown to be valid and reliable. Going into what Anzi asked, so my definition of load was total distance, and this was basically any distance accumulated from walking, jogging, running, or sprinting. High speed distance was anything 75% or greater than their max speed. And so I used basically however fast they ran in the practice or game and took 75% of that. So the cool thing you can do with GPS is you can band your velocities, meaning I can set what they call band 1 as walking, and that would be any distance covered from 0.0 to 3.0, and then jogging would be 3.1 to 5.5 miles per hour. So anytime that unit is moving within those speed zones, it will record that distance covered. And so for me, I used my last 2 bands as this high speed distance. Anything greater than 75% was recorded as high speed distance. This was our typical week. So again, I didn't come up with this plan. This was already here. These training goals. These percentages those were just what the coaches eyeballing wanted. Again, I didn't come up with this, the strength coaches did, so I was just observing. We come in on Monday after a game day, roughly 70 minutes. They watch film prior to coming out, learn from their mistakes. They were shooting for moderate volume, moderate intensity. they were shooting somewhere between 75 and 80% of a game load in terms of those volumes and intensities. Tuesday and Wednesday were the two main days of the week. These were the days that we were trying to get after it on the field, doing some new installs. Tuesday was more designed for your starters, going through those, and Wednesday was more of a fill your bucket type of day for your non-starters, and even guys who may have not gotten as many reps the prior day. In terms of the training goal, we were looking at anything greater than 85% of a game load, so kind of adhering to those in-season strength maintenance workouts where you try to keep your load at 85% or higher to maintain strength. Thursday was our walkthrough day. You know, the guys just come out in the t-shirt, shorts. There's not even a ball out there. They're just walking through plays. This is more of a visual practice. Volume and intensities were real low. Really, anything less than 50% of the game was desirable. Friday, now this is where it got a little unique for us. We call this our Fast Friday. We wanted it to be low volume but high intensity in nature. Really, the volume kind of comes with the distance that you rack up in terms of high-speed distance. The way that this practice was structured, it was an hour long, but we kind of simulated more of a game. So you had your offense and your scout team defense basically going up against one another out on the field. Again, game-like situation, you're trying to play fast. Defense and the scout team offense were on the sideline, just kind of relaxing like a normal game would be. So like I said, the distance will come, but it's relatively low compared to a game. Saturday was, of course, game day, 100%. I used the one-way ANOVA to determine the differences between loads and intensities between practice and games. I used a bump range correction pair t-test to correct for that, and I used SPSS. So going through these results really quick, you know, as assumed, competitive games did have the most the most distance and high-speed distance, which that was assumed. The amount of total distance covered on Tuesday's practices was greater than all other weekdays. Again, this was sought out. These were the days that we were supposed to get after it. The amount of total distance covered on Wednesday was greater than Monday, Thursday, and Friday, but was not statistically different from Tuesdays. So again, this was intended that we wanted that to be a high volume day. So in terms of total distance, we did all right. And as on my way over here, I realized I didn't have a chart of the percentages, but the highest day on Tuesday, that was roughly 87% of a game load, so it was within that training goal. Just as with every other day, Wednesday was right on the money, 85%. All other days fell within that percentage goal that the strength conditioning staff wanted. High speed distance is where it kind of gets a little dicey. So high speed distance covered on Tuesday practice was greater than all of the weekday practices except for Wednesday. Again, this makes sense. They wanted those 2 days to be, you know, intense. However, when you're comparing those to games, Tuesday was much higher in terms of intensity, but it was only 57% of a game load. So we kind of missed the boat pretty bad on that. And again, I wish I would have put it in these slides, but I didn't. 57% compared to the intended 85%. So again, not very good. Wednesday was even lower than that. Wednesday, I believe, was 32%. So we kind of seem to be tapering off as the week goes on. There wasn't a significant difference between Wednesday and Friday. So again, Friday was pretty low. We didn't hit that 80% mark like we intended to. Here's a table of those results. One thing that you will notice, and that I noticed right away, was how low some of these values are. Now this one makes sense. This one they're not doing much. But you know, for a Monday to only have 16 yards of high-speed distance seems pretty low to me. Same thing with the Friday. Even on these days, they seem really low. A game, 120 yards of high-speed distance. That's kind of where I saw some of the issues in the way that we use these variables and looked at the data. For total distance, again, you know, your Tuesday, Wednesdays, they were the highest days of the week. This was 87%, this was 85% of your Saturday game. Again, all of these, your Monday, Thursday, Friday, all fell within that sort of zone that you wanted for comparison, for game comparison reasons. So again, the primary purpose of the study was to characterize typical weekday volumes and intensities and to compare those volumes to games to establish a training model. The model was composed of those three theories: general adaptation, stimulus fatigue, and fit fat. based on the findings, the training model was not supported. I say this in terms of the intensity, and that's really what we're looking at to kind of maintain those fitness parameters that our coaches really were interested in, which is max speed. You know, the highest day that we achieved over the course of the season was 57% on Tuesdays, and that was the day that you're supposed to really get after it. And after looking at the data and kind of sitting in on all these practices, it doesn't make sense to use high-speed distance as that variable of intensity, because the way that practices are structured, or even the plays that you run, you may not be giving your athletes an opportunity to get up to max speed to run. So that's one big issue with how I analyze this data, and something that we've definitely learned from. You know, again, here on this slide I have the first assumption was achieved, so max games, or max intensity and volume was on game day, so that's good. We didn't exceed anything during the week, which was awesome. So some future studies, you know, greater sample sizes. This was only using 1 year of data. Right now we've got 3 years sliced up the way that we want it. You want to analyze based on playing position or individual status. Again, you may notice that some of those values are really low, and I think that's due to the fact that you've got some guys that don't even record any high-speed distance in practice just because it's not their job to record high-speed distance, and that's why that average might be so low. So I don't think you should look at it from a team perspective and more on a position level. You may want to use some other GPS metrics other than total distance and high-speed distance, and this is kind of where Catapult really upped the ante and gave us a new variable called max acceleration. And so they calculate this for us by knowing the distance of the play and how fast they got to that distance, and it's a calculation on the back end. So looking at that max acceleration, you know, you're looking at the first 10 steps or 5 steps, whatever, to kind of use that look at that intensity pathway, rather than looking at high-speed distance, because again, given the play or given the context of the game, they may not be able to get up to max speed. Kind of fast forwarding a little bit, what we ended up doing was we sliced up every single play from the last 2 years, and less than 1% of plays did anybody get over max speed, because you're cutting and you're changing direction so much, it's just not possible. So this is kind of a backdoor way of looking at that pathway, because you can still maximally accelerate but not hit that top end speed. In terms of volume, it makes more sense to kind of look at how many times are they maximally accelerating, so how many reps do they hit above a certain percentage, you know, in terms of volume. You know, that's kind of what I'm talking about here, is you're cutting out the white noise, you're cutting out all the stuff that doesn't really look at what's going on in play. So you're cutting out them running out of the tunnel, you're cutting out all the movement on the sidelines. You know, I know some people would say, well, you're missing, you know, when wide receivers do run a route and they run back, you're missing out some of that data, but really that's not what we're interested in. We're interested in what's going on in between the whistles. And so cutting out some of that white noise dramatically changes your data and how you might train or implement a plan for football players. And probably another important step would be to identify if a particular model even works. You know, we don't even know if the model we had worked. The way you might go about that is with some cortisol, testosterone levels, neuromuscular strength, or speed testing. Already kind of went over that, over the conclusion. I really want to get into some of where we're at today, because we're doing some really cool things with how we analyze the data today. So, like I said from the beginning, this paper was probably the first one that used GPS in American football to help explain the game. Unfortunately, like I said, it's filled with study flaws. Power was an issue. The way that they looked at what max speed was, or that 75% was a little flawed. So basically, they set an absolute value of max speed, meaning it was the same for everybody. So if I can run, let's just say 20 miles per hour, my 75% is the same guy who can run 18 miles per hour. So you're inflating some of the high-speed distance for the guy who can run fast, and the guy who can run slow may not even record any high-speed distance. So what we ended up doing is setting that relative to the person and their individual max speed, so you get a more representative picture of what their 75% is.
Where do you get that max speed? Is that the fastest speed they run?
The fastest they run in the context of the game. Because there has been some debate to use that, like their training max speed. So when you have them run like a 40 or whatever, but that doesn't make sense either, because they're not weighted down by equipment. and they're running linearly, which virtually never happens in game. It happens less than 1% of the time after we looked at our data.
So is that a peak speed that over the season they get?
Yeah, yeah. And so this kind of came to the point, are we collecting a lot of noise? And when we looked at this paper, they were reporting a lot of inflated numbers, it seemed like. And I've got forgot to put this in here. So again, when I go to talking about noise, they're basically reporting everything that goes on from the time you turn that unit on to the time you turn that unit off. You're getting everything, and they're saying this is what they do in the game. So this is really what you should train for. These guys are going to be required to cover 6,000 yards in a game. We got to get them ready to go 6,000 yards. When in reality, it's not like that. And I have this as an example. I know a lot of us have iWatches, and so this is kind of that signal versus noise. If you look at your difference between calories here, you have your total calories at 733. It took you 4 hours to do that, but really what came at a cost to you was this 390. So again, what is this 390 and where are you getting this 733? And that's kind of our interpretation of all of this, kind of like what is this signal versus noise? And I have this in this slide right here. So the bar graph on the top is 2 years of our data sliced up by individual play. This table on the bottom here is from that paper that basically turn the unit on, turn the unit off, see what we get back. Just looking at our DB, for example, we recorded over the last 2 years, and again, this is with about 12 defensive backs, about 1,500 yards per game on average. These guys are reporting a total distance of 4,696. So that's a huge difference. And again, if you're going to a coach and telling them, or a strength coach and saying, hey, you got to get these guys ready to go this far, I mean, that's a big aerobic component, which, yes, there is a small aerobic component, but that's putting a large emphasis on that sort of training modality. We're looking at our high-speed distance. We recorded 207 yards. Their high-speed distance was 513. So again, pretty big difference between that. And then the sprint distance, this is where it gets really interesting. 2 yards. We recorded 2 yards over 2 years of sprint distance. They recorded 247. So again, big inflation in numbers. Are you really looking at how you should be training for the game of football? Likewise, with our offensive guys, you see a very similar trend, big inflation numbers. We'll use the wide receiver in this case. We went about 1,100 yards. They reported 5,530 yards. Again, big difference. I like looking at the sprint distance. They used 315, we recorded 5. So again, really big differences. That comes down to your training. Are you training for max speed? Are you training for accelerations? How are you training? And this, what we showed, really you should be looking at your accelerations. But again, that kind of goes down to your thoughts on training. A lot of people are so caught up with this linear speed. We gotta get it fast, straight. But really, that's not the context of the game. And that's kind of what these data show. And that's kind of what we pulled from this book. And if any of you are in the strength and conditioning field, I highly recommend this book by Fergus Connolly, Game Changer. It's very deep. It's got a lot of theories, a lot of figures, a lot of things that this guy thinks is right. But he's literally done it all. He's been in every single sport and has done this job for years. But the main thing I took away from his book was the overall objective of most team sports is to create space or time or to close space and time. So now you're looking at, the difference on offense and defense. As an offensive player, as a wide receiver, for example, your job on a pass play is to create space to get separation so you can get open to get the ball. As a defensive back or a defensive player, you're trying to close that space to stop the play from going any further. So that really turned us to that max acceleration variable. Are we, within the context of the game, which is about 10 yards, are you creating that space and are you closing that space? And so this is just kind of where we're at today. After looking at all of the data and looking at these accelerations, and one thing you might notice about Coach Stoops and his teams, he gets out to extremely hot starts in the first 5, 6 games. We look great. Bye week hits, and then after the bye week, it just seems like every game we come out, we're extremely flat. So I kind of wanted to dive into that a little bit deeper. And looking at this max acceleration, you'll notice right about here, this 3.6 is where the bye week happened. This was 2017. So we see this sort of decrease now. These are meters per second. And really what you might be asking yourself, well, what's the difference between 3.7 meters a second and 3.3? That's about a mile and a half. A mile per hour difference, one mile per hour difference in speed off the line of scrimmage. And so what this data is looking at, these are just wide receivers. I controlled for contextual factors, meaning I took out plays where the wide receiver was being pressed. So a defensive back was right on him on the line of scrimmage. I wanted to look at plays where he had about 5 to 10 yards of acceleration. These are just pass plays. I controlled for screen plays because on those screen plays, wide receivers aren't accelerating off the line. They're basically running to the defender to get blocked. There really wasn't a difference between grass or turf. So ultimately, this is just looking at the wide receiver's ability to maximally accelerate off the line of scrimmage per game. And this is the average for all of our starting 5 wide receivers. That was 2017, and just like in 2017, this was 2018, we see a very similar trend. Straight down over the course of the season after the bye week, and then this was the Florida game at 4.2, the highest over the season. Our lowest, we kind of go back and forth about Louisville just because it is a rivalry game, and it's just kind of like that there is a motivation component to this. But going down to the very last game of the week, or very last game before Louisville, 3.22, it's a difference in 2 miles per hour off the line of scrimmage. That's a huge difference. And we've been trying to look at ways to look at the data, like what does that look like when someone's chasing you? And so we looked at some combine data on the 40, and even 1 mile per hour is about 1.5 yards of separation, which again is pretty significant when you're talking about getting open. So that kind of led me down the road of looking at our practices. Our practices, are we getting those accelerations in practice? And so this past season, this was our 5 wide receivers, the sum of all of them. The blue bars indicate practice and the red bars indicate games. So one thing you'll notice is the red bars, they really never change. They're always high, they're always, between the 5 wide receivers, you're getting about 150 accelerations per game. Now you look at your blue bars, which again is the sum of all of your wide receivers. You're getting about 50% on these days, and again, this is in the beginning of the season, those first 4 or 5 games. Here's when the bye week was, and then after the bye week, you look at these practice reps. Between 5 wide receivers, you're only getting about 3 reps at 85% or greater of max acceleration. So that's telling me we're not stimulating that pathway. We might have some detraining going on, which would explain the decrease in max acceleration over the course of the season and why we seem flat every single week we come out after the bye week. So, what are the mechanisms? This is kind of where we're at today. Is this central nervous fatigue? Is it peripheral fatigue? Is it involution, or a little bit of both? We don't know. In the end, we just need more research. So, those are my references. And other questions?
How do you get it through to coaches that they need to be doing stuff different?
We show them stuff like that. Basically saying like, this is what your practice looks like this week. What we show them would be like, okay, this is the game, what your wide receivers did in game, and this is how you're practicing. Like, you guys aren't stimulating a game like you intended. So usually that kind of gets the message across, but they haven't seen any of this data where it's just max acceleration. They're so caught up in speed. They love speed. They love seeing guys top out at 21 miles an hour or 20. And even Coach Stoops will come and ask, like, why aren't our guys running 20 miles an hour? Well, it's because the practice doesn't allow them to get to 20 miles per hour. So we show them things like this, graphs, trends. They like pictures, so yeah.
So Tyler, how do you control for the competitive component in this data analysis? Because the in-game situation, timeouts, the way a different team plays, is going to have a huge impact on the number of repetitions the player's going to see.
Right, and so that's kind of the next step. We were just trying to find a trend because we found the first trend in 2017, and then we just wanted to see if we saw the same thing in 2018, which we did. But yeah, in terms of the motivation and the context of the game, we tried to take most of that out by looking at, you know, the presses and basically looking at the uncontested accelerations off the line of scrimmage. But yeah, that's kind of the next step in terms of exposures. We just gotta figure out a way to look at our practices, because our practices are gonna be impossible to kind of slice up because of the way it's structured. I mean, we got 2 fields and guys would be running all over the place. So this is actually count. So like, the unit can actually count how many times they go above that acceleration. So yeah, I mean, it's the motivation piece. Not really sure how we're gonna get there, but we were just interested in looking at those trends right now and kind of going from there.
Do you look at number of plays run in a game and number of plays run in a practice?
Yeah,
Where
so
maximum acceleration would be?
So it's actually, you will have more chances in practice to have your maximal accelerations than you would in game. Like in game, on pass plays, you're probably got 50 to 60 chances, but in a practice, I mean, they're running those things, they're flying through them over and over again for 2 hours. So in practice, they have a lot more chances than they do in game. And controlling for those, the pressing situations. So even if they were being pressed, like taking that out, honestly, most plays, they weren't being pressed from the last 2 years. I think there's maybe, out of all the plays played over 2 years, only about like 20 of them they were actually being pressed.
So maybe just to follow up on these 2 points, it sounds like maybe looking at it from a relative standpoint, number of plays in
Yeah,
practice
exactly.
games that they could have hit max speed, but what did they actually do?
What did they do?
It's the
Yeah.
absolute, put it in context, yeah. It was a good concept.
So this is probably more just a thought rather than suggestion. How much do you think that it's reasonable to assume the decrease in like max acceleration, that sort of thing, is accumulated to, or is associated with accumulation of like just bumps and bruises sustained over the course of like 12 games, right? So at the start of the season, they probably feel good. I'm assuming 12 games in, they probably feel like crap every day because they're getting hit. Like, I mean, it's a collision sport, right?
Right.
So how much do you think that affects how they're playing?
I honestly don't think a lot, because I mean, these guys have played football for a while and they know that if they sit out a day, like that's gonna take time off the field for them. For me, it's more of a lack of stimulus and just kind of that, it's harder to get up to that max speed when you haven't ran that fast in so long. It just doesn't feel right. You feel like you don't have your legs underneath you. And that's the point that Coach Stoops always says. He goes, oh, I just don't feel like we don't have our pop anymore. And he actually starts to, right around the bye week, he'll take their load down. But really, I think it's more of a function of detraining, and that's why you're not seeing this. With the bumps and bruises, I mean, these guys are used to it. I don't think that might impact it at all. We get injury reports, and you know, the only time that they're going to be pulled out is if they have a significant pull or anything. If they have a bruise, like they should be able to fight through it. So.
I think off of that point, you're going to get out of athletes what you're expected. So if coaches don't expect them to, or not pushing them to accelerate or do things maximally, that's not going to happen.
Right, and that really goes down to showing them something like this, and basically telling them like, look, you need to give them more opportunities or drills to get up to that acceleration, because between these two graphs, I mean, you know, this could be the difference between 2 game-changing plays. So, you know, you just gotta give them an opportunity to get up to max speed, and if you don't get it in on the field, then there's a way to get it after practice in either some sort of top-end runs. But I know you're kind of rolling the dice there because it is after practice, and there could be some fatigue, and then you could see some soft tissue injury there, or you get it in the weight room. But when you start going from the field to the weight room, you kind of lose that cyclical motion of accelerating. So, I don't know. There's a lot of questions we still have to answer, but we just thought it was interesting to see these 2 things.
And your idea of detraining is pretty interesting. Have you poured through the literature to look at like what the half-life of these glycolytic proteins are, or the half-life of like neural adaptations?
So,
Because you could get at whether that's even possible in this time course to
Right.
detrain.
right. Really the big ones, and it's everyone's got a different idea of it, and it's really going through some of the track literature. So looking at like Charlie Francis and even some of the early periodization guys, they really talk about those residual training effects, and it's really hard to kind of find where they came up with this 3 to 5 days of stimulation. And honestly, the one paper I did, scientific paper I found about residual training, didn't deal with sprint, but it dealt with aerobic in ducks that flew south for the winter. And they like looked at like muscle biopsies of them and looked at the ducks that flew south versus the ones that didn't, or something like that. And that's kind of where they're kind of basing all of these like residual training effects, all these track people are. But it's really hard to find where they're coming up with these 3 to 5 days.
Yeah, but you can get like bed rest studies in humans
Yeah.
where there have been biopsies and look at what the detraining time course is glycolytically and see is it even possible to detrain within this
Right.
time frame. And that would point you in the direction, is that a feasible explanation
Yeah.
that you want to probe farther?
Do you have any feel for like, you know, what they do in the weight room during these times, and is that impacting it? Are they on the field first, or are they in the weight room first on a given day, and then just long term maybe?
So usually they'll be in the weight room, like in season, they'll be in the weight room after practice, and it's broken up in between offense and defensive guys. There might be a little problem. They do lift on Monday, then you're intending to have a high CNS practice on Tuesday, and then they'll lift them again on Wednesday. So you've got 3 days in a row of potentially high CNS output. That could play an effect into this, but you know, when you look at the cards, their strength cards, it's not like they're going in and doing like a 95%, you know, snatch or back squat or anything like that. It's usually more of like more or less like a bodybuilding circuit. It's more of like a blood flow sort of workout with a quick, you know, maybe 65% back squat to get them started. But that's it. Usually, I mean, they don't really have a plan in place. That's what I mean with, you know, they just kind of come in and do whatever they want. So, yeah.
Can you go back to one of your slides where you have talking about the bye week and the flat week? So those numbers, like say 3.2, 3.33, what exactly are they representing again?
So those are meters per second. Offline, that's how they calculate their max acceleration.
Okay. Are there any way to take into consideration, like say time, you know, so you have your max acceleration. If somebody has, you know, 2 players have the same acceleration speed, but one player is able to get to that max speed faster, kind of like a rate of force development, does that GPS, can it track that or keep that in?
So,
take that into consideration?
We've thought about that, and like it's really hard to kind of. I mean, you'd have to look at the video and tell when the play started and when they actually accelerated off, like from the start of the play, and look at that difference in time. I guess is that where you're going with it? Like looking at how fast they.
But something like that, you know, like the whole concept is to, you know, open space, open
Right.
time. If you got 2 guys going, that guy hits 20 miles an hour first, say a split second before, and then all of a sudden they both hit at the same time, they're distant, so they're going the same speed now, but he's out in front first.
Yeah.
So he's able to maintain
So
that.
yeah, I mean that would require us to have the GPS from the defensive guys too. So this is just our wide receivers coming off the line. But yeah, I think you would have to know kind of when the play started, and then yeah, like you said, the rate of force development between him. I don't think the GPS can do that
Okay.
because all we're getting is basically how long it takes them to get up. Yeah.
So that's like an average over the whole play, correct?
Over the entire game for pass plays.
Yeah, so meters per second is velocity.
Yeah.
Acceleration will be per second.
Yeah.
Is this per second squared, or is this a velocity over a set distance? So I imagine
Velocity
you're-
per second.
Okay, so that's in actual meters per second?
Yes.
It's velocity?
Yeah, velocity, yeah.
Okay. So then, like, you get a velocity per second for one play, and then you have to get a velocity play for the next one and the next one, and then you get an average of each
Yeah, because we
play.
went through and we used video to tell when a play happened.
Right.
And we created all these individual periods and basically got the max for all those plays and then average it across our wide receivers.
Would you be able to break it up to like the first 3 seconds when they're actually, because that's when they're definitely gonna be accelerating if it's, you know.
No, yeah, because even when you plot the data, like how I showed on an earlier slide, how that data comes in, like it basically will show you that trace, and that's what you're looking at. So that's what these are just averages. Like I could pull the absolute max for each one and basically say it showed the same thing. Like their absolute max, but then you're only getting 1 data point per game. So, because it's going to pull the highest one from the game.
With you using video and the GPS, how long does it take you to analyze one game?
So yeah, this is where that first scope kind of came into play. The first time I went through it, it took me, what would you say, Dean? How long would a game usually take? Like 3-4 hours to do one game. And then I figured out a way that I could get it done in probably about an hour. So, yeah. Because the thing with Catapult is you create the period, and then we had to name it. We had a very specific naming protocol. Like we wanted the quarter, the side, like, or it was offense, defense, the quarter, the series number, and the play. And then we would tag, was it run, pass? Was it a press? Did a press happen? Like we had all these contextual factors that we were tagging. And then when you were done with that, then you had to go put the players in that period. So who was out on the field and put them in that so you can analyze that on the back end. So yeah, it took quite a while the first go around, but then figured out a faster way.
Have you looked at these trends like by quarter, like as
We
the
have,
game goes on?
yeah, and just as we thought there would be a decrease quarter 1 through 4. So I mean, there's fatigue going on there, but
And like even taking into account like game situations, like if it's like a tight game going into the 4th quarter.
yeah, we looked at the Texas A&M game where we went into overtime and they just tanked into the 4th quarter. Or into overtime, like even on our linemen, like the linemen couldn't even, their load per contact was significantly lower in compared to the 3rd or 4th quarter.
Okay. Yeah. Who's got the sign-in sheet? Anyone get the sign-in sheet?